In the Rings of Power show, Season 1 and Season 2 have been highly criticized for changing the lore of Tolkien's writings for the show. I can see creative liberties being taken to fill in gaps and change some storylines due to licensing issues, but some of these major changes we are seeing on screen are really unnecessary. But let's go over some of these major changes in the Rings of Power Season 2's 4 major storylines. First, let's talk about the 3 Elven Rings of Power, and we'll also discuss the main reason for the Siege of Eregion. Yes, I know the 3 rings were forged in the finale of Season 1, but they play a big role going forward in Season 2, and they might be one of the biggest lore changes in the whole show. Also, I have made a video on the 3 Elven Rings of Power and what they actually do if you're interested in a deeper dive on the 3 Elven Rings. In the Rings of Power Season 1 finale, we see Celebrimbor forge the 3 Elven Rings and being overseen by Sauron as Halbrand, which is a created alias of Sauron for the show. The 3 Elven Rings are created first before any other Rings of Power. Then the 7 Dwarven Rings of Power, and during the Siege of Eregion, the 9 Rings for Men were created with the blood of Sauron disguised as Mithril. Also in the show, the Siege of Eregion was done by Adar, which is a created character for the show as well. Now in the lore of Tolkien, it is quite different. First off, there is no Halbrand character, and Sauron comes to Eregion as Annatar. Annatar taught Celebrimbor his knowledge of crafting and magic, thus creating the 7 Dwarven Rings and the 9 Rings for Men. This knowledge and magic taught by Sauron would infuse with the rings, the spells and will of Sauron, allowing them later to be corrupted and manipulated by the One Ring. After their forging, Annatar would leave to Mordor and begin creation of the One Ring. This is when Celebrimbor, without the presence of Sauron, would forge the 3 Elven Rings. When Sauron was finished with his One Ring, he would place it on his finger, and the 3 Elven Ring bearers would hear the voice of Sauron and would then know that they were deceived by Annatar. They would remove the 3 Elven Rings so he would not be able to attempt to corrupt them. Sauron would learn about the 3 Elven Rings and would bring war to Eregion in order to claim them for himself. Then Celebrimbor sends the 3 Elven Rings into hiding so Sauron would never be able to obtain them. So the Rings of Power order and creation drastically differ from what we get in any of Tolkien's writings. Also, since we have already discussed a little on the Battle of Eregion, here are some other changes that are made in the show as well. One thing we do see is the realization by Celebrimbor that he is being deceived by Sauron. Obviously, since Sauron is not present in Eregion during this time, and like I said earlier, it was when Sauron created the One Ring and war is when they realized they were deceived. During the battle, we see Galadriel, Gil-galad, Elrond, and Arandor as major elven characters in the fight. For one, Arandor is not an actual character in any other writings. He was created specifically for the show, and I actually kinda enjoy his character for who they created him to be, but I guess we'll have to see what the future holds for his character, since they can basically do what they want with him. But both Galadriel and Gil-galad are not present during this battle, and they are actually take the place of 2 other major characters who are not present in the show at this time. So it was Celeborn, not Gil-galad, who led the soldiers in the battle, and Celebrian and not Galadriel helped the elves in the city. Now Celeborn in the lore is actually Galadriel's husband, and Celebrian is their daughter, which brings another major issue from the show because Elrond marries Celebrian, so that whole kiss between Elrond and Galadriel means he actually kissed his future mother-in-law if they go with the same storyline. They could have easily done with the scene with a hug or even a forehead-to-forehead motion and avoided this whole kiss scene. For those that don't know the lore, they are going to be really confused going forward. So there are some major changes to all of this that I am not sure how they are going to go about this going forward. This whole timeline with the Elven storyline is really all over the place, but let's move on to a different major storyline. Next, let's talk about the dwarves. I honestly think the Durins are the best part of the storyline, and the actors have done an amazing job portraying them as well. Khazad-dûm is really lackluster in terms of looks and splendor of the Dwarven Kingdom. The Second Age is a prosperity time for the dwarves unless this is going to come later down the road in the series, but as of now, Khazad-dûm does not look very glorious. Now for the Dwarven Ring of Hror. What Tolkien wrote on the Dwarven Rings is that they were useful to the dwarves for amplifying wealth and their natural skills. In the show, it seems like it also adds to the wearer's strength as well. Not a real major issue in my opinion, but this is a little different than the lore. Now this ring did link King Durin to want more mithril, and this led him to cut down his own people to get into the cavern. By doing this, they came face to face with the Balrog, later called Durin's Bane. I have a full video on Durin's Bane as well, so go check that out if you want a deeper dive into that as well. So obviously Durin's Bane in its lore is definitely not during this time period. In fact, it was the year 1980 of the Third Age that they awoke the Balrog, and this was Durin the Sixth, not Durin the Third, and the Balrog decimated Durin's people. Now, even though seeing the Balrog appear and Durin grabbing the axe, leaping towards it, knowing he stood no chance, was an amazing scene, but it's still thousands of years too early. Now, the dwarves did take a back seat in this season as well, but a lot of the stuff that you see going on is all made up for the series, and I really don't want to go over all the little things, but just these major things in the dwarven part of the series and the lore. But now let's dive into the Numenorean storyline. The major plot right now is really the power struggle between Miriel and Pharazôn. First off, this idea of getting rid of the faithful in Numenor happens over hundreds of years in the lore, but has obviously been really crunched down in the series. We have the King of Numenor passing and are presented with the coronation ceremony where the eagle comes, and Pharazôn steals this opportunity to make it seem like the Valar were choosing him over Miriel. Now this does present a few issues against the lore, but let's talk about the Great Eagles first. So the Great Eagles are messengers of the Valar Manwë. So in this instance, Manwë would have sent the eagle to give his blessing during the coronation. When Pharazôn stepped in and took over this blessing, so to speak, that wouldn't have actually worked because the eagles were capable of speaking. This eagle would have just spoke up and told everyone that Pharazôn was not the worthy one. Now, something that could happen in the next season that is a disturbing action by Pharazôn is that he breaks Numenorean law and forces Miriel to marry him in order for him to take that power from her. I definitely see this going in a different direction in the show, which is fine by me if they change the lore in this instance. Now, in the lore, a lot of the hatred against the faithful actually comes from the manipulation from a captured Sauron, manipulating the Numenorean leaders to go against those that are faithful to the Valar. With this already happening without Sauron being in Numenor, the downfall of Numenor seems to be happening a different way. We will just have to wait to see how they go about all of this, hopefully in the next season or maybe even the next few seasons. The future of Numenor is not going to be as great as we want it to be. And in the lore, Numenor does get decimated, so I'm interested to see how they're going to go about that whole storyline in the future seasons. Now on to the storyline that I am most disappointed in is the stranger who happens to be Gandalf, the Dark Wizard, and the hobbits plus Tom Bombadil. So literally everything here is all just made up for the show. I will skip over the hobbits because they are my least favorite part of the show. I have 2 short videos on the history of the Stoors and Harfoots on what we actually know about them from the lore, so go check those out if you want any more information on that. First, Tom Bombadil is done pretty well to be portrayed on screen. I think if they went any farther in how Tom is in the books, casual viewers would be a little put off by how he is. How they have done Tom in the show is fine by me. So really no complaints in that area. Now for Gandalf being the stranger, this was definitely a dropped ball by the show. Obviously it's just an attempt at getting viewers to tune in for Gandalf, but it makes no sense at all. Gandalf does not come to Middle-earth until the Third Age. The Blue Wizards have 2 different ideas written by Tolkien. First they came with the other wizards, then went into the East, and in later writings they came in the Second Age, which would fit perfectly in the show's timeline. They traveled to the East, which is where Rhûn would be, so anything after that would be fine to fit into the show. Making one of them the Stranger and one the Dark Wizard would have worked perfectly together and even given them the opportunity to explore and create a deeper story for those two Blue Wizards, but they decided to make one Gandalf, and I sure hope they don't make the Dark Wizard Saruman, but with how he keeps calling Gandalf old friend like Saruman does in the Peter Jackson films, I think that might be the route they are going. And that would totally make no sense because Saruman is not corrupted until he begins to use the Palantir that he has. So for him to go bad, then good, then bad again, and for Gandalf to just follow him later in the Third Age would make zero sense. So hopefully they make this Dark Wizard a Blue Wizard, but I'm not going to get my hopes up for that. And then to think about it with Gandalf coming so early, like where was he during the Battle of the Last Alliance? Gandalf was nowhere to be found in the lore, in the movies. I do not know how they are going to get around all these things that they have just placed in front of them by putting Gandalf in the Second Age. This was literally the biggest drop ball by the showrunners by making the Stranger Gandalf and not one of the Blue Wizards. So those are the major changes from the lore in the Rings of Power show, and we could dive deeper into more changes and issues, but for now I think that is enough for this video. And hopefully this video sheds some light on some of the lore changes in the Rings of Power Season 2, and like I said, there is many other lore changes as well, but I believe these are some of the biggest changes to the lore in the Rings of Power Season 2. Thank you guys for watching, and I will talk to you guys all in that next video.